The mob, in both cases, have human beings murdered to appease the deity, to shift all of the energy of their panic over some impending disaster onto that particular object of sacrifice. The mechanism is the same. In the American example, they're worried the sun is going to go out unless they offer it blood and hearts. In the case of what happened in Judea, everybody's trying to anchor themselves in a existential chaos. They're still having the same kind of crisis.
I mean, in Gerard's vision, it's going to be the same kind because we're human and we keep finding ourselves in that crisis. The chat is thinking, Casey, self-sacrifice versus involuntary sacrifice. Well, what's interesting is Aztec, or in the Spanish accounts of what the Aztec thought they were doing, they say that the victims actually offer themselves, which is an interesting problem. And the Gerard talks about that. It's like, who are we to disbelieve that? But on the other hand, what the crowd says, the crowd needs to believe that they're voluntary. But we say Christ is voluntary too, so that's a Casey's just right. God sacrifices himself. Cain sacrifices Abel. This is where the break, the sort of okay. So one of the things that people are often asking, can God die? And this is one of the things Gerard's trying to understand. It's like God is in that moment of violence somehow. The sacred is there. Maybe not God, but the sacred, right? The sacred is this. It rises from this moment of collective violence because it's the thing that brings peace somehow. And therefore, the God who is both source of the crisis is also the resolution of the crisis. And again, I'm not quite sure where Gerard hypothesizes God comes from, because he does end up Christian after this long journey in his own meditations. And seeing Christ as, it's like he's trying to see how Christ is in fact the only way out. It's like fundamentally the only way out of this cycle of escalating rivalries.
Well, that makes sense because he's crucified on Golgotha, which is the place of the skull. So it's the death of Adam and Eve and the rivalry for knowledge, the envy of the serpent introducing this fruit to Eve, and then Adam obviously doesn't want to miss out, so he takes it. That's the place where Christ ends up crucified. The resolution to this happens at Calvary because the energy has to be directed.
So we have surgery suggesting the way to break the cycle of mimetic violence is martyrdom. Yes, but we need to understand why it works.
Differentiation.
A view from a different perspective. He's recognizing that in all of the other juxtapositions, we've been looking at them, right? So we stand outside of them, as it were, and can't resolve them or get ourselves caught up in them. In this one, I have Tissot's image of Christ on what Christ saw from the cross. So you see his feet with Mary Magdalene at the bottom of it, and then the crowd that Christ from the cross sees. And what does Christ see when he's on the cross? Does he see good and bad? Another layer of what Gerard starts to understand is the way in which the scapegoat, the victim, becomes a monster. Monsters, we're going to end up with monster killers in all of this, right? That it's appropriate for heroes to fight monsters, and this is one of the things that I've meditated on because Tolkien and Beowulf, and he has this sort of, in his great Beowulf and the Critics essays, thinking about why the monsters have to be monstrous. Right? It really matters that Grendel is a cannibal, although he's descended from Cain, so he's not really human, but he is.
Yeah.
Right? But that he needs, and that Grendel and his mother have to be monsters, and then the dragon has to be a monster, and so they have to be monsters in order for the hero's victory over them to have the right kind of energy, as we're thinking about this. But in myths like the Oedipus, Gerard spends a lot of time on Oedipus and the scapegoat. He's thinking about how Oedipus deserves to die because he's murdered his father and married his mother, and he's the reason for the plague. So this gets us around to the COVID, right? It's like, who was the reason for the plague? And you all may be wondering why we don't have certain people on trial right now, because they were clearly the generators of the stories behind the decisions that were made. My prediction right now is there's not going to be a big uproar against them, and I'm thinking that Gerard is possibly the one who has the insight to why. It's like after the war is over, it's not necessarily the war criminals that get put on trial. Something else. Somebody else gets caught up because the group who has participated in the collective violence needs a scapegoat, needs to not feel that it was at fault.
They have to have the catharsis of scapegoating somebody.
Yep. Which from this perspective rather puts a different light on Nazis, but we'll do that some other time. I mean, it's like the Nazis are definitely the you know, you put all of the Nuremberg trials, right? We put all of the crimes, that happened in the war on the Nazis at those trials.
Yeah.
All of them.
There's never a discussion on what anyone else was up to. I mean, even from the perspective of the other Axis powers.
Right.
It's just sort of whoosh, like no one, you know, we don't have a discussion with Italians about the same kind of things that you'd have a discussion with the Germans about. And virtually no one in Australia gives a thought to the Japanese, you know. So it's interesting. It's like they've taken on
the Hans are we the baddies? Yeah, they're the ones covered in skulls.
Yeah, just
yeah. It's all in the United States somehow. I mean, I was looking at that graph that was circulating today about how the birth rates in Japan have plummeted.
Oh yeah, sterile Japan.
Who I wonder who dropped bombs on it. And there's there's
a rather spicy one too.
Collectively, all sorts of things that we're starting to recognize the United States was participating in. Are we the baddies? And yet nothing ever happens, right? It's like so. This is kind of got you guys to the edge of where I'm thinking about right now. It's like, why isn't there going to be a massive outcry against the people who brought us the lockdowns, the people who brought us those demonstrations, not vaccines, the people that convinced you all to wear masks? Right now, it does not feel like everybody in the conspiracy theory part of the world wants to say, oh, the trials are starting soon. But that's not actually what happened, for example, after the French Revolution, right? Robespierre's got his head cut off, and then it all evaporated. The energy just
disappears, dissipated. The focus point's gone. So the orientation is lost. The orientation of the mass, the orientation of the crowd is gone. So the energy dissipates. So without the hate muse, it doesn't really exist. Everybody returns to the amnesia.
Well, okay, so another of the stories that Gerard analyzes in Scapegoat is Cadmus and the dragon teeth. So Cadmus in Thebes kills their plague, right? Their plague images and all of this. Obviously, plague, somehow. COVID, whatever it was, had the psychological, psycho-spiritual, mythological presence of plague, even though we know it probably wasn't. Probably certainly wasn't. So it's there as the plague, so we need something to fight it. Cadmus kills the dragon and takes its teeth and sews the teeth, and they become armies. And then the armies are, they're going to rampage around Thebes, and so he throws a pebble in the middle of them, and they fight each other to the death. And it's the pebble, right? It's like just he having slain the dragon and then created a new dragon problem, throws a pebble in, and the armies kill each other. Thebes is saved.
New thing, new destruction.
Well, more that there isn't actually it's like the mimetic rivalry has dissipated, and therefore there's nothing to fight about.
Gone.
Yeah, and insofar as I don't right now in my sensitivity to stuff, sensitive or not as it is, I don't feel it. It feels like everybody's in amnesia, and we're trying to do the historical thing and make sure that we mark stuff and say what happened and things like that. But my study of history and my memory of after World War I, okay, Germany collapsed for a bit, but the 1920s are surreal in the degree to which World War I's gone, right? Tolkien and Lewis try to write mythology about it, but otherwise,
Roaring 20s. No one worried about. Yep.
The baby boom in the 50s, they come right after World War II.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's this weird kind of, once the sacrifice is the victim is killed, the scapegoat is killed. So I'm not sure with the COVID stuff what the scapegoat was, whether it's in fact the entire children, the children who were all forced into masks and on Zoom for 3 years, which is a pretty big child sacrifice.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I'm still sort of thinking this through. Anyway, we're all monsters. And what I'm meditating on this one, what Christ sees from the cross is humans and monsters, monsters and humans. And you can, worry about whether those labels are on top of the Pharisees or the Romans or the mob or whatever. But what Christ sees from the cross is good, bad, bad, good. It's the crowd.
The crowd is just a bunch of blood-sucking vampires.
And then we are faced with the real problem of this, what is evil, right? Satan has a role in this. Satan is definitely a force and a reality. But the reality of it is, remember we were talking about the demons in the desert, whether they're our thoughts or external to us? If Solzhenitsyn is right in the line of good and evil goes to the heart of every human being. The evil is in us. Casey is trying Salem, Nuremberg, Salem. Yes, something there.
Nice.
Yes, very nice. Bishop saying that was a mic drop statement. That Nazis the scapegoat. Well, we aim to please, or startle or horrify. Keep you in the mythological, so that you are not settling in. Don't get caught up in these spiraling rivalries, because you will be the crowd, incapable of seeing itself.
Give us Barabbas.
That's what Christ saw from the cross.
Yeah. We will have no king but Caesar.
And this is what Gerard sees, and this is what he says. The Gospels are a revelation of the scapegoat was innocent. No other mythology cannot see that. They always come up with ways of making the scapegoat either responsible or vanish the crowd murder, one way or the other. And vanishing the crowd murder is very, very typical, I think. It's like you can't see. He says, like in Socrates, when Socrates dies, the philosophers escape because they're there with him being friends. They're not administering the dose, right? It's just those evil Athenians. So telling the story so that we are no longer responsible, right?
Yeah.
The World War II, the atrocities of World War II, people are starting to wake up and being able to see them. The atomic bomb was definitely one or two. The firebombing that the British and the Americans engaged in was definitely another. That insofar as the crowd can't see its own guilt, we crucified Christ. Hans, are we the baddies?
We are the monsters.
We are the monsters.